Hey guys, behind me is my 2004 Mustang GT, and in this video I'm going to be going over some of the pros of owning a 1999 through 2004 SN95 New Edge Mustang. Now, I've owned two New Edge Mustangs. This '04 GT, which is a 5-speed manual, I've owned since October of 2019, and before it I had a 2001 Mustang GT with the automatic transmission, which, if you're familiar with my channel, you may remember seeing it. I made probably 8 or 9 videos with it, including a review. But today specifically we're going to be talking about my '04, and there's going to be a few flashbacks to my '01 to show some of the differences between the automatic and manual. That'll be later on in the video. So without further ado, I'm going to pop the hood, open the doors, and we're going to look at this and see what the pros are of owning a car like this. Now, before we open the car up, I'm going to talk about the first item on the list, which is the looks of the New Edge Mustangs, which this easily could have been the last item discussed, but I'd rather do it first because y'all enjoy the last item the most. So anyway, the looks of these New Edge Mustangs. As you can see, mine has some external modifications done, and a lot of internal ones too that you can't see. But luckily, most of these mods were done by the previous owner, so it literally saved $3,000 to $5,000, depending on how cheap you buy stuff. So in buying this car, as I did, I saved a bunch of money. But we've got Cobra Rep wheels, offset in the back. You can see it's a little smaller rim, and it's also inset. That way I can fit the Nito 555s on there, 315s on the back, 275s up front. And this car is lowered. I'm not sure what lowering springs they used, but it's looks to be about a 1.5 inch drop. Not anything drastic, but enough to make it look really good. And just the looks on these cars, even stock, they look great, but just a few modifications like rims and lowering has these cars looking amazing. You can see with those 315s on the back how fitted this car looks. It just looks awesome. This is in the dark shadow gray color. I thought I mispronounced that for a second. But yeah, dark shadow gray, DSG. And in my opinion, DSG is one of the best looking colors on these New Edge Mustangs. Of course, red is a really good looking color on these as well. But as you can see, this car from just about every angle looks awesome. Now, this is in my own opinion, but compared to all the other early 2000s cars, especially American made, I would say this definitely beats the Camaros in looks. I love Trans Am, so I will say I think the Trans Am WS6 does look better, but these Mustangs just look awesome, especially with the few appearance mods that have been done to this car. And I think the spoiler in the later models, 99 and 00 had a different spoiler. 01 might have had a different spoiler too, I can't remember that. But this is the later model spoiler, which wraps around. My other Mustang, which was an '01, it had a different spoiler, but that car was pieced together in a lot of different ways, so who knows if that's actually how it came from the factory. I also love the hood scoop appearance-wise, which later on in the video I'll show you what that looks like from the driver's seat, which looks really cool, really mean. Now, it is fake. I know it's fake, and I hate that it's fake, but to be honest, I wouldn't trade that hood scoop for anything, just because it looks so nice. Alright, next on the list is the reliability of these Mustangs with the 4.6 liter in particular. I don't have any experience with the 3.8 or the dual overhead cam 4.6. So we're just going to be talking about the single overhead cam 4.6, such as the one before you. Now, I've owned this car again for 5 months, and these are just reliable cars. Of course, there's the occasional exception, but most of my friends that have owned these cars, they've all been really reliable on them. The only two things that have happened to me in this car is the alternator started to go out, which, as you can see, that's actually the alternator off of my '01, which it blew its head gasket. Goodness, it would have been last July, which it had 270,000 miles. So, I mean, that's a ton of miles on it. And so I kind of just took a few parts off, put them here and there, sold a couple, eventually sold the car. But the alternator started to go bad. Of course, it did not strand me. It's just the battery light started coming on, and eventually, anywhere over about 2,000 RPMs of battery light would come on. So then I changed it, because originally it was like anything over 3,000 or 4,000 it would come on. Then once it started to get into the daily driving RPMs, that's whenever I changed it. Also, the back coolant hose here, the heater hose, one day when I dropped it down in fourth and hit the throttle and just saw a cloud of smoke behind it, I was, oh great. But it was just this hose popped off. I guess the screw or bolt got a little loose. It popped off, of course, sprayed coolant all behind me. But that literally was a 5-minute fix at the gas station. Put more coolant in it, tightened that thing up pretty good. And those are the only two things that have happened. My other Mustang, as I said, I got it with 258,000 miles, and by the time its head gasket blew, it was at 268, and it was very reliable. Actually, the only time it ever broke down and left me stranded was it was after owning it for about 8 months. It was 2 weeks before the head gasket blew. The actual connector where the alternator plugs in right there, it had came slightly off. The connector had busted, and I didn't realize that. I thought it was, oh great, the alternator's shot. So I actually took it off, went and have it tested, and it wasn't. And then I got back and started looking at the connector and saw that it would slide on and off. So that wasn't really a true breakdown. That was just an unfortunate incident. But then 2 weeks later, its head gasket blew because its fan had stopped working, and I didn't realize it. And so I started driving it, let it idle for a while, and then, it was basically done at that point. But this isn't talking bad about these engines. For driving two separate cars over a year, just a couple issues like that, only one that leaves you stranded, is not bad. Especially in a pony car. These things are built to be driven, and driven fast and driven hard. So, and I would say I fit into that category. But they're very good engines. So that's it for that. Now the next item on the list. Now for the next item on the list, I have both the doors opened up, because this next part's going to be the sportiness, comfort, drivability. It's a pretty broad pro, but it all kind of fits together. So of course we're going to be talking about the interior and the drivability. And let's go over to the driver's side now. That's the passenger side. One thing is, compared to the 4th gen Camaros, which I have owned some 4th gen Camaros E28s, compared to it, this car, it's a lot more comfortable and feels like it's made better. You can see I rubbed a wipe over the dash earlier. I guess I missed a few places once it dried. That's what that stuff is. But the interior just feels a little like it was crafted a little better, and you can tell that by looking in. You can also tell it by sitting in the car, which we can get in. As you can see, this of course has the 5-speed manual, which this is the Mach 1 bullet shift knob, which I've got a short throw shifter in here. As you can see, my shifts are really short. But again, back to the interior, there's that hood scoop that I told you I'd show y'all from the inside. When you're driving, this is typically my view driving. It just looks awesome and mean. But again, compared to the 4th gen Camaros, their interior just feels a little cheaper. I did like the seating position in the 4th gen Camaros better, but I also really like the gauges on these new Edge Mustangs. But again, this interior, it doesn't really rattle too much when you're driving. Whenever it does rattle, it's due to the exhaust I have on this, which is Shorty headers, catless H-pop, and Borla Stinger's catback. And so it makes a pretty good sound when you're driving this thing. So if there's any rattles, it's due to that. But really, nothing else really rattles in this car. It's just a nice car to drive. It's comfortable. The only complaint I have is used to in my automatic. It doesn't do it as much in this one, maybe because I got used to it. But the pedal position would sometimes hurt my right leg, as in I would just have to change its position every 5 minutes of driving or so, because it would start to get kind of sore. But I guess I got used to that because it doesn't really affect me anymore in this car. One other thing while we're in this category, while driving these cars, they're very sporty. This does not feel like a traditional muscle car, you know. The LT1 Camaros that I own, you know, they're small block and they have tons of torque down low. Whereas these cars, they make their power up higher. If you gun this at 1500 RPMs in this manual, you're gonna think you're driving an import or something, you know, slow import. Sorry to offend anybody if you got a fast import. No, not sorry at all. But if you gun this thing at 1500 RPMs, you're really not going to feel much. This car, it comes alive about 2800. You can feel it as power if you're at like 23, 2500. But once you hit 3 grand, 4 grand, 5 grand, this car really pulls, And especially with the modifications on this one, I haven't mentioned this yet, but this one does have some custom grind cams in it. And you saw whenever I was showing the engine bay that it does have a few modifications to the engine, such as a JLT cold air, BBK throttle body, 78 millimeter, and you know, it gets air in. It's got a tune on it, throttle body spacer. This is a pretty formidable new Edge. I mean, of course, you go against a modern day Coyote, you already know the Coyote would win, but this car stands its own. It really does. And for the drivability, it's comfort. It feels more like a sports car. I prefer the rough muscle car. Can't think about a word that, but I prefer rough muscle cars, and this car does ride rough enough to keep me, you know, keep me pretty excited driving it, but it also drives sporty enough to where you might not think that this is, you know, a modern day Mustang. It still feels old, what I'm trying to say, especially whenever you're up in the power band. All right, now this next category I'll keep pretty short because we've already discussed it somewhat, and that is the modability of these cars. Now, there were a lot of Mustangs made in these years. From 94 to 04, there was around 1.8 million, which I know that we're talking about the new Edges, but there were a lot of these cars made, which means there is a lot of modifications you can get to these. As we've already mentioned, mine's lowered, has rims, wide tires in the back, headers, full exhaust, cams, you know, throttle body, a nice cold air intake, short throw, 373 gears. This car is modded out, and there's so much more that you can do to these. Even though mine might appear like it's got most of the modifications known, there's also deck lids on the back, different spoilers, different rear bumpers, different front bumpers, you name it. You can, you know, you want your car to be unique, you can do whatever you want, which in my opinion, mine, I would consider it basically a finished platform as it sits. I don't plan to put heads on it anytime soon. I don't plan to put a supercharger. I don't plan to lower it anymore or put different wheels. I think as it sits, this car right here is just about perfect. And that's how I want to leave it, how it is. You know, pretty soon it's going to be my daily driver as I start to build my truck some more. And, you know, I wouldn't want to daily drive anything else right now. You know how car guys are, that could literally change tomorrow, but right now this car is perfect to me. Now guys, finally we have the sound. That's the final category, and of course this is my favorite category. I love the sound these 4.6s make, so listen. enjoyed the